We already know how most of the Corel options work, but we need to still practice and create some projects to get familiar with the program. Only then you'll be able to move on and create your own projects. Let's start by creating a new document. Expand the size drop-down list and choose A4 preset. Leave units at millimeters and set the number of pages to 1. Make sure that the color mode is set to CMYK and rendering resolution to 300 dpi. Leave all other options at default. Of course, we need to remember to save our document. It's really important. This way we won't lose any of the progress and the file will be safely stored on our hard drive. Go to File menu and click on Save As. Change the file name to 31 and press Enter. Saving our document also affects the number of options available in Corel. Go to Tools menu and click on Options. Expand the Workspace options list. When we save our document at least once, the program will then automatically save our document in regular time intervals. Click on the Save option and look at the Auto Backup section. As you can see, Corel will automatically create a backup copy every 20 minutes. This option works only after we save our document. This option will simply create a copy of our document every 20 minutes. This way, none of our progress will be lost. Here we can choose where this copy will be saved. We can either save it in a temporary folder or specify our own path. Well, it's best to leave it as it is. All backup copies will be saved in a temporary folder. You should remember about these options because they're really useful. Let's move on and create some guides. Before we do that, however, we should activate the Snap to Guides option. We won't create guides manually by dragging them from the rulers. Instead, we'll input specific values for each guide. Go to View menu, then Setup, and click on Guideline Setup. Let's move this window to the left. This way, we'll see all our guides appear on our screen. Let's start by creating horizontal guidelines. Click here, and write 0, and add Create a new guideline. Margin for our project will have 10 millimeters. Input 10, then click Add. The height of the photo frame will have 65 millimeters. 65 plus 10 is 75. Input 75 and click Add. Of course, these guidelines are created only for this specific project. Other projects will have different guides. The space between will be 5 millimeters. When we add that to 75, we get 80. Input 80 and click Add to create a new guideline. As we said before, the photo frame height is 65 millimeters. 80 plus 65 is 145. I'm talking about all of that so you know where these numbers are coming from. The space between the photos is 5 millimeters. Input 150 and click Add. Let's now add 65 millimeters to this. The height of yet another photo frame. Input 215 and click on Add to create another guideline. The space between the photo frame and the next element will be 3 millimeters. Input 218 and click Add. We're not sure of the next element's height, so let's skip one guideline. Let's go straight to the top margin. Input 297 and click Add. This guideline is placed at the top of the page. The margin height is 10 millimeters, so the next guideline must be placed at 287 millimeters. Input 287 and click Add. Switch to vertical section. First we'll create a page and margin guidelines. Input 0 and click Add. Then input 10 and click Add. Remember to use this button and not the Enter key. The width of the photo frame will be 100 mm. When we add the margin to that we get 110. Input 110 and click Add. The space between the frame and the photo frame is 5 millimeters. Input 115 and click Add. The right edge of the page is placed at 210. That's where we'll place our next guideline. Input 210 and click Add. Let's now create the right margin. Input 200 and click Add. Click OK to close the window. Your document should now look like this. You need to activate the Snap to Guidelines option. Go to View menu, then Snap to, and click on Snap to Guidelines. The program will help us to correctly position all the elements by snapping them to existing guidelines. Let's save our document now. Go to File menu, click Save. The first part of our project is ready. Switch to Rectangle tool and draw a rectangle inside the space between the guidelines. These rectangles will serve as frames for the photos. Let's also change the colour of the figure to grey. Make sure that you start drawing the rectangle from the intersection of the two guidelines. The Snap to Guidelines option will help you correctly position the cursor. Create the next rectangle and change its fill colour to grey. As you can see, the Snap to Guidelines option is really useful and it's a great help when we want to create such projects as this one. Scroll up and create another rectangle. We change the fill colour to make these new figures more visible. Press Shift and F4 to fit the page on the screen. Let's now create another figure starting from this guideline. Let's now change the height of the figure. Make sure that the lock is deactivated. This way we'll be able to change the height and width separately. Change the height to 10 mm and press Enter. As you can see, when we change the height, both the top and the bottom edges were moved. What can we do if we want our figure to stay aligned to the bottom guidelines? Press Ctrl Z to undo the changes. First, let's change the fill colour of this figure. The very first icon in the control bar is the object origin. It's now set to center point. Let's change it to bottom middle point. Remember about this option. It's sitting right here at the beginning of the control bar. We tend to forget about it. Let's now change the height of the figure to 10 and press Enter. As you can see, the figure height changed and its bottom middle point stayed in the same place. Press Ctrl Z. Let's change the height of the figure. This way the effect of changing the object origin will be more visible. Change the width to 10 mm and press Enter. As you can see, the object origin, set to center, stayed in the same place. Press Ctrl Z to undo the changes. Change the object origin point to bottom middle. Now, the bottom edge of the figure won't move during the resizing. Change the height to 10 mm and press Enter. So this way we can easily use this option in our projects. We can also use a pretty similar option through the Arrange menu. Go to Arrange menu, then Transformations and click on Size. As you can see, a docker appeared on the right hand side of a program window. One of the advantages of using this docker is that we can set a number of copies we want to create. Let's set copies to 1 and click Apply. Change the fill colour of the figure to yellow. Change the Y to 10 mm and click Apply. As you can see, the object was copied and its size was changed. Press Ctrl Z twice to undo the changes. Deactivate the proportional option and change the Y to 10 mm. Click Apply. As you can see, the bottom middle point hasn't changed its position. So when we want to change the size of a figure and duplicate it at the same time, we can always use the size docker. Let's close this docker and delete all the extra figures. Let's now change the colour of the figure. Select it and go to Uniform Fill tool. We'll define the colour of this figure by inputting a specific CMYK value. It may happen the client will give us CMYK colours before we create the project. By using this window, we can change the CMYK values, the object and figures in our document. Switch to the Models tab. Change the cyan to 30%. Set magenta to 70, then yellow to 60, and black to 0. Before we move on, let's talk about one more thing connected to CMYK colours. We should avoid a situation in which one of the component's percentages is lower than a certain number. This number is different for each type of paper. Let's say that the one we're currently working on will be printed on newspaper paper. With this type of paper, we should operate on only grey colours. Set cyan, magenta and yellow to 0. By newspaper paper, I mean standard paper on which everyday newspapers are printed. Set the black component to 4 and click OK. The colour of this element is now set to grey, and it won't be printed on the newspaper paper. Go back to Uniform Fill and Models tab. So when we work with newspaper paper, we shouldn't set the components to 10% or lower. Let's now talk about art paper and other higher quality papers. Such papers, we can use standard CMYK colour values. Set cyan to 30%, magenta to 70 and yellow to 60, then black to 10%. Let's just refrain from setting any of these values numbers lower than 4. Instead of setting, for example, yellow to 4, we can set it to 14. Setting these options like that will prevent any mistakes in print and therefore make our work less stressful. Set yellow to 60% and black to 0, then click OK. So the colour we've set looks just like this. Let's activate the status bar for a while. As you can see, we can now move our mouse over the colour and its CMYK value will be shown on the status bar. So this colour isn't a brown colour, its CMYK colour is 30, 70, 60, 0. Change the outline colour of the figure to none and deactivate the status bar. I just prefer to work without it. If you want it, you can leave it. Though we don't really need it, let's use layers anyway. By doing this, we'll practice and learn about one more of Corel's elements. Go to Tools menu and click on Object Manager. As you can see, the Object Manager docker appeared on the right. There are two lists, the list of layers and the list of objects present in our document. Click on the pluses next to the page 1 and the master page to collapse both these lists. Here we have a distinction between page 1 and master page. When we add another page, it will automatically appear in the list. We won't talk about the master page now. This section contains settings which affect the whole document. This includes the guidelines, desktop, and document grid. Desktop is the white area outside a document's page. Let's try to make the guides invisible by clicking the eye icon next to the guides option. Make the guides visible again. Let's add another page. As you can see, all these guidelines are set to all our pages of the document. Press Ctrl Z and expand page 1 list. In this list, we also have guides. This tells us that we can set guides only for one page. Let's click on the guides text to select it. The elements under guides is nothing else than the layer we're currently working on. This colour next to the guides text is the colour of all our guidelines. Let's create one guideline. Now add a new page to our document. As you can see, the guideline which we've just made isn't on the page. This tells us that we can create guidelines that are set for only one page and they won't be screened on any other page. Let's press Ctrl Z to undo the changes. Collapse the page 1 list and add a second page to our document. Let's now revise the process of adding guidelines which exist on only one page. First, we need to go to Object Manager Docker. Then, we need to expand the list of elements of the correct page. Now, click on the guide text and create new guideline. Try to switch to page 1 now. The guideline we've just created is present only on one of these pages, so before we create such guidelines, we should make sure that we've selected guides from the correct page. Here we have the guides layer of page 1, and here we have its counterpart on page 2. Well, we won't use this thing in today's project, so let's delete the extra guideline. Click on page 2 with the right mouse button and delete it. So now we have one page which contains two separate layers, layer 1 and guides. We won't use the guides layer anymore. The red colour signalises which layer is currently selected. To select a layer, just click on it. Click on layer 1 for a second time to edit its name. Change its name to Start and press Enter. Change the layer colour to red. Why do we need this colour? Let's go to the View menu and click on Wireframe. As you can see, all elements from the Start layer are marked by a red colour. Let's make a little experiment. On page 1, we now have only Start layer. We skip the Guides layer because it's not your standard layer. Let's move this docker to the left. Access the docker menu and click on, well, before we do that, let's make sure that we've selected the right thing. Collapse the master page list and click on Start layer. Always look on which layer you're currently on. This way you won't have any troubles when you're editing the wrong thing. Click on the Start layer name to select it. Access the docker menu and click on New Layer. Change the name of New Layer to Picture. And place one of the photos on this layer. Well, let's change the name of this layer to Background. Maybe this way it'll be easier to remember and use. Click on the background layer name to select it. As you can see, the background layer colour is now set to black. Switch to the Circle tool and draw an ellipse. The ellipse is marked by a black colour because it's placed on the background layer. So, only by looking at the colours of these elements we can identify on which layer they're placed. When we click on the element, the list of the layer on which it's placed will be automatically expanded. Let's expand the Start list. By clicking on the elements here, we can select the objects placed on the Start layer. Expand the background layer list. It has only one element, the circle, which we've just created. Switching between layers by clicking these elements is regulated by one of the options from the docker menu. This option is called Edit Across Layers. Let's move the Object Manager to the left. Access the docker menu and click on Edit Across Layers option to deactivate it. Now currently on background layer. Now we can't switch between layers by just clicking on different elements. We need to first select the right layer. When we select the layer Start, we'll gain an access to all the elements stored in this layer. Well, selecting layers is a bit problematic at times. Just remember to click on the layer's name when you want to select it. Let's activate the Edit Across Layers option again. Access the docker menu and click on Edit Across Layer. Now we can switch between layers by just clicking on these elements. When this option is deactivated, we need to switch between layers first. In other words, we gain access to certain elements only when we switch to a layer containing them. Let's now move this element. Well, first we need to activate the Edit Across Layers option. Let's now talk about how we can move these elements between layers. Click on the circle, drag it and drop it over the Start layer. Go to View menu and click on Wireframe. As you can see, the colour of the circle is now changed. This tells us that it's now on a different layer. Let's change the background layer colour to green. Now drag the circle and drop it over the background layer. Now the circle is marked by a green colour, and all other elements by a red colour. Of course, these colours can be seen only in wireframe mode. Switch back to normal view and delete the circle.